Welcome back to The Journey of a Singer with me, your host, Nick Pritchard. This is the podcast where we dive into the fascinating and unique journeys of those individuals within the creative industry. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Natalie Rushdie. Natalie is a classically trained singer with an impressive resume, including performances at prestigious venues such as the Royal Albert Hall, St Paul's Cathedral, the London Coliseum, and 10 stadium renditions of the national anthem. Natalie made an entrance into the jazz scene with her sold-out shows at the Brasserie Zédel in London. During our conversation, Natalie takes us through her journey from brewing tea at her finance job to enchanting 90,000 fans at the EFL Cup Final at Wembley Stadium. She also shares the touching story behind her latest music release, dedicated to Dame Deborah James and in support of the Bowel Babe Foundation. We delve into the day-to-day realities of being a singer in today's music industry and provide valuable tips and tricks for aspiring performers. So sit back and enjoy the journey of a singer with today's guest, Natalie Rushdie.
Natalie Rushdie, welcome to the journey of a singer. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited because when I get a guest on, I do the research. Inevitably, you get the best bits from the person themselves, and oftentimes a lot of that stuff isn't available on the web, and you don't get it in this authentic, raw form. So I've been personally quite excited to hear what it's been about for you. I'd love to start at the beginning, if that's possible.
Yeah, of course.
Where did you begin singing? Was it a childhood thing?
So I used to sing outside in my garden, and my neighbours spoke to my mum, and they were like, maybe you should get her into singing or musical theatre or performing, because I'd sort of be dancing and singing outside. And my mum was like, okay. And then I just sort of went straight into like Royal Academy grades, and then I absolutely loved it. But I had such a fear of performing. I was really nervous as a child. Like I would like really badly shake, or all of my sort of early performances, you'd see me like clasped hand were behind my back because I'd be so nervous and so embarrassed that people would be able to see that. So that's sort of where I started when I was 9. And then I did sort of lots of like music competitions. I did like the Kingston Music Festival, Guildford Music Festival, all of them basically. And then I wasn't quite sure if I was going to carry on, basically because I just thought, am I too nervous to do this?
Oh, really?
So yeah, it was sort of like that sort of catch 22. Do I carry on? I was quite a nervous person, but here I am. So that's sort of how I started. And then I went to university to study music. And then I left university and sort of moved to London and wasn't quite sure if I was going to do music or if I was going to do fashion. So I went to the London Fashion College and actually studied marketing and buying and merchandising. And then basically I was like, I need to give the singing thing like a go or see if it works out or anything like that. I went to Amsterdam Opera House, trained there for a bit, then did some more operas. I basically started from the bottom. So I did all of your sort of backing singing. I did all of your sort of behind the scenes singing, shows, little chorus parts, and then sort of grew up from there.
And it's classically trained is how you trained.
Yeah.
And is that something that is that what you always wanted to do, to be a classical singer? Was that always the genre that you wanted to do, or was there any other influence involved there?
I think honestly, no. Both my parents weren't musical and they didn't come from musical backgrounds. So they had no idea that there was different sort of options. And I think I went to school and they were like, you need to do your Royal Academy grades, you do a Trinity. So I did piano, violin, theory and singing. And then I did all of those. And I was just sort of pushed into this sort of classical, well, not pushed because I didn't know that there were other options out there, to be honest. And then it wasn't till I'd sort of been doing classical for about 5 years. And my husband said to me, he's like, why don't you sing the songs that you like to listen to? And I said, I don't know. And he's like, well, you can do that. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, now you think you always need someone to sort of give you that permission to be able to do what you want to do. And then I sort of discovered that actually I much preferred it. That was sort of my love and my passion. And then I could actually do it. For me, I've had like almost 2 careers and I've seen 2 sides of different industries, but obviously they're the same industry at the same time.
And those 2 sides is classical and jazz.
Yeah.
There is somewhat of a correlation there in the sense that the type of people that book those singers in terms of clientele, they seem to like both genres.
Yes.
Which I suppose would have been a nice handy transition, because I think going from something like classical to maybe pop or folk or something like that is a bit far-fetched. But classical to jazz, that's nice. And you can bring what you've learned from the classical world into the jazz world.
Definitely. It's helped me so much, because I think classical, what I didn't love about the classical industry is that you can't put your own take, that people want to hear a song as it's written. And I understand that, but I was the rebel and wanted to always put sort of my own sort of flair on songs. And that's what I loved about jazz, is that you were able to do that and you were allowed to do that. And that for me was really exciting. But at the same time, even though like when I just sort of do like the London Coliseum, and that was my first gig with a full orchestra and like a 60 piece choir. And for me, it was the classical teaching I'd had that allowed me to do that, because I was aware of what was going on behind me. And that was, so for me, I am always appreciative of my classical background, because it's allowed me to do different things.
I remember chatting to a guy called Matt Ford, who's a great big band singer.
Yeah.
As a jazz singer, what you're talking about, putting your own stamp on it, playing around with the feel, the timing, those kind of things, is beautiful to do.
Yeah.
And a few years back, I would probably do that way too much. I went to see Matt Ford, and he was like, no, you've got to strip it back to the basics.
Yeah.
First, get the song right, sing it how it should be written.
Yes.
And then you can maybe play around with a few little bits and bobs here and there. And it's not something that I've been jealous of people that have had that classical training, but certainly that is a beautiful place to start. Because firstly, technique-wise, it's going to be spot on. And secondly, the way in which you're used to singing a song is how it should be.
I feel like classical sort of education gives you the best foundation. And I do completely agree with him that you really have to learn a piece as it's written, and then you can play around with it, and you can sort of put like, I look at it sort of like the embellishments, the sort of exciting bits on top of it. And this is what I've noticed doing big gigs where people have not had these backgrounds, and a lot of the time pop singers really struggle, because when you're doing it with an orchestra, it's not like you're doing it with a small band or in a recording studio and you can do whatever you want. You can't do that. When you have an orchestra behind you, you have to listen. That's the most important thing. You have to listen to what the orchestra is playing, because they are not going to follow you. They are going to follow the music. And that's just, you're not going to be able to sway that.
Playing with a 5-piece band, you can do what you want and they'll follow you.
Yeah.
Very difficult for a big orchestra to suddenly maneuver, even if there is a conductor.
And they're not going to.
Yeah, and exactly.
They don't care.
That's not how they're used to playing as well. So you have to respect what they've been, what they're reading. They are reading a score, and it's not going to alter from there. They're very, very good at being precise, very precise on that score. And alternatively, when you come to do the more jazzy based gigs where it's more free, how has that been transitioning from a very different scenario where there's no way you could do that? How have you found it on the other side of things?
I find it quite difficult. I find it difficult to be able to switch, be a bit more free, to be honest. But I still think the same thing applies. If you know your music that well, is that you can afford to do that.
Do you watch yourself back when you're singing as well? Are you very critical of that? Are you a critique of yourself?
100%. I was actually told off by my vocal coach because I would do performances and come off stage and be like, how can I be better? And she was like, Natalie, you need to stop doing that. Like, you've just literally had a standing ovation. Like, you need to like enjoy the moment, enjoy that you performed, because it's wonderful. But I think you're on this constant train of like, you want to be better. I'm sort of really bad at doing that, actually reflecting, go, that was wonderful, that was great, it was a good performance, and then watch it back like in a week's later and then reflect and work on it. And so she banned me. I'm not allowed to critique myself for at least 24 hours, which is really funny. But so I used to do that with her, and we would rip everything apart, from the way that I walked on stage, the way I smiled, hand movement, gestures, vocally, sound of vowels, I mean, everything. And I do think for me that was really helpful to get better, because I think as you become sort of more established and you do different performances, for example, like TV performances, you realise that you make really funny faces. And I remember I did the Royal Albert Hall and I was so excited to be there that I was like nearly crying with joy. And I sort of wandered on, did my big performance. And then she was like, why didn't you bow? And I sort of just like, sort of looked really nervous. And she was like, no, you need to give a proper curtsy. Like, people want to enjoy that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that we worked on. We work on the sort of whole experience.
Do you think sometimes if you're too in your head thinking about all these things, it can detract from the performance itself? Or do you think it's very important to focus on the performance?
I think there's a fine line. I think there's a point where you need to enjoy it. And I feel now, in the last couple of years, I do enjoy my performances rather than being like, I need to do this, this, this. But I do believe that practice, for me, is the most important thing, because then it turns into muscle memory and you just do things automatically. And I always, whenever I got on stage, the immediate thing I do is smile.
Yeah.
It relaxes the face. So that's the immediate thing I do. And then I sort of practice like my curtsy and things. But I think for me, those things were really important, because I think performing, there's a difference between being a wonderful singer and a wonderful performer. And most people want to see a wonderful performer.
Because there's hundreds of great singers.
Hundreds and hundreds.
And how do you differentiate between the two? There's something called the halo effect, which you may be familiar with, which is where if one particular attribute is good, it bleeds into the rest of the attribute. For example, if you look amazing, sometimes people are inclined to, they hit a wrong note, whatever. If you look terrible, they would pick up on that instantly, and vice versa. From what I've seen from the videos I've watched, you've always got, your attire is spot on, and there's clearly been a lot of thought into what you're wearing and how you appear to the audience as well. Is that something that you do consider a lot before doing a show?
I always make sure that my dresses, I can actually sing in them, and there's a lot of space for breathing and obviously moving about and everything. But I think for me, it just adds to the whole performance personally. It's kind of it's a strange one, because you're in this kind of thing where it shouldn't be important, but it is. So, for example, like when I did my Wembley Stadium, so I've done 10 stadium performances, and when you do a stadium performance and you sing the national anthem, you are given a sort of a long criteria of what you can and can't wear. And you basically can't wear the colours of the team. It's not good to wear green, because obviously then you're part of the pitch. And then obviously either BBC or Sky have to sign off your dress or what you're wearing to make sure that you're not wearing sort of like a bikini on the pitch or something like that. So there is a lot of consideration for that, and especially doing television, you don't want to be wearing like flowers or patterns or stripes or something, because that can be picked up quite weirdly with the camera. So, and I try to, for me, I mean, I wish I had a stylist, because that would save a lot of time. But I try and wear things that are flattering, because I'm not a size 8 or a 10. So I try to wear things that are flattering and look nice on stage. So it just, that's how I sort of, my dress picking goes, basically.
Well, I mean, you clearly got a good sense for fashion. That's something that stands out as well.
I feel like
that's
I'm a granny.
Really?
Like that's the thing when everyone's like, oh, but I'm literally like, I just like to wear flowers, florals and dresses, and basically like I'm an old granny.
I think it's very classy. I think that goes with your brand.
I always say that I would love to be really trendy and cool and wear like all really chic outfits, but I'm not trendy and very cool, so I just like to wear dresses, and that's all where I go. So that's where.
And in terms of those, like you said, you've done 10 stadium
performances.
In terms of your journey getting there, what's the process been like for you getting to the point where you're singing at the Albert Hall, you're doing the stadium tours, you're on tour with people like Blake, and what's that process been for you?
I think the process, and I think that I always get asked this on Instagram, it's longer than you could ever imagine. So I'm 36 now, and I've sort of been singing professionally probably for about 15 years. And I think people see the glossy aspect of it. And I think this is the same with every singer, that 90% of the time is spent rehearsing or working on what you're doing or trying to get other gigs and things, and they don't see that aspect, because it would be boring to be like, hey, I'm rehearsing for the 10th millionth time. But to be honest, like I started at the very, 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 bottom, doing everything I could, taking on every single gig that I could, getting as much experience as I could. And then I sort of trained and trained and trained and trained and trained and did some more training. And then basically I feel I learned a lot. I toured with Blake and they're a classical boy band, and they won a Brit Award and they're amazing. And I toured with them for about 50 gigs. And I learned so much from them, and they gave me so much information on how to perform. And also one of the things I remembered that I learned was learning how to talk in performances, about what to say, what was interesting, what you should be saying. And then obviously I got my Wembley Stadium gig, and then obviously things were going wonderfully well and had lots of other gigs. And then I decided to pack it all in.
Really?
And I was like, I'm not going to do classical. I can't.
Just for you decided to pack it in for the classical, but not for your music.
No. So basically I was going through like a sort of conflict of confidence, and I was just like, I want to be singing these songs. So I basically booked 4 gigs at Zédel, which is a venue in London, a sort of jazz cabaret venue. And I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to come. I don't know if anyone's going to be interested in hearing all of these new songs. And they sold out. And it was the only shows they'd had sold out the whole time. So then I sort of got London Coliseum and the Royal Albert Hall. But it's constant. I think people forget that they see the singer and think that's just what you need to be. But I constantly am emailing and asking people. So to perform at the Royal Albert Hall at the beginning of the year, I said, right, I'm going to perform at the Royal Albert Hall. I don't care. That's what's going to happen. I emailed every producer, every director of the show, and I looked through what's on and just kept on emailing saying, listen to me, please. And that's how I got the Royal Albert Hall. But I think people don't realise that it just naturally, and it's probably the same for you, that you just constantly have to be emailing people and putting things out on social media so people are reminded that you're a singer. So yeah, it's been a hard... Yeah. And I remember my vocal coach and I were coming back from BBC Breakfast, and I'd just gone to iTunes #1, and it was 5 hours from Manchester to London, and we drove 5 hours, and we're like, isn't this crazy that like we're iTunes #1? This is mad. And we spent the next 5 hours talking about all the rejection I had, and we were still talking about all the times I'd been rejected, or an audition hadn't gone right, or I hadn't got a gig, or, I'd been dropped by a gig, or, yeah, that's the thing with this industry. You have no idea what's going on. But I think you don't obviously put that up online. Maybe you should.
It seems to be a common theme that people, certainly that I've spoken to, nobody's sat here and said, yeah, it's been easy. I did this and this and this, and this is what I have to do. Virtually everybody has said it's been full of rejection. There's been a constant battle of trying to get somewhere. And even then, it's battling to stay there as well, or even to get to the next place. And that is part of the journey. That's part of why I called this the journey, because it's very easy to see what's on social media. Yeah. That's your highlight reel. We were discussing before how and I think a lot of singers like to have their Instagram as a show reel feed to show people, yes, you should book me. If a client comes and looks at your Instagram, they want to see your best bits. Yeah. And that's why
it's a marketing tool.
It's a marketing tool.
Yeah.
The problem with that is then people assume that that's your day-to-day, and that's what happens all the time. You're performing at the Royal Albert Hall, you're on tour here. And the reality is, 9 to 5, you're emailing 50 people saying, who's the producer for this show? How do I get to perform here? And that's something that I don't think the general public, and even a lot of singers who maybe aren't where they want to be, understand or realise. You have to be grafting.
It's relentless. And I kind of feel, and this isn't meant in an awful way, but I think if you want to be a singer, if you don't have that drive in you to constantly pick up the phone or send emails, just don't do it. It's too hard, because every day you will send 100 emails and you'll get 99 no's and 1 maybe. Well, think about it. And I think people forget that. And I think I always was like naive, thinking, I'll be at the Royal Albert Hall and that will be it. And then you're like, oh gosh, now you've got to go the next day and start emailing. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's, if you're nervous about sending emails or phoning people or asking people to do things for you or to help you, either learn really quickly how to do it or don't bother, because there's 100 people that will do. That's an awful way to put it, and it's a harsh way to do it, but it's too hard to not that's the reality of the industry.
What about those that have a manager that is willing to do that for them
I've had many managers.
and they don't do enough?
No one's going to push as much as you are. They're just not going to. That's just the reality. I mean, I think a manager can be really helpful. I don't know if, do you have a manager?
I have a manager that does my contracts.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. That's clever.
Not particularly music related. So
Yes.
they're not out there. The gigs that I'm getting are from myself. I have an agent for TV and film, but
Yes.
what I will say is all of the biggest things that have not come through the agent or management.
Yes.
All of them.
That's
all
the
of them.
reality.
And you're very correct in saying nobody's going to push harder for your dreams than yourself.
Yes.
Because they're your dreams. They're not your
Yes.
manager's dreams necessarily.
And your manager has like more other people they're working on, unless you're like, you know, Dua Lipa or something. I've had quite a few managers, and a bit like yourself, everyone came to me directly, and once you sort of know what to look, I have someone that checks over my contracts, but of course, but I think you're probably much better managing yourself.
And in this day and age, you have a greater ability to do so.
Definitely. I think before we didn't have, gosh, it's making me sound so old, but you didn't have Instagram. There was obviously YouTube and Facebook. I think we're so lucky now that, for example, like when I wanted to go to jazz, I found Sally Green, who we've become very good friends, and she owns Winnie Scott's. And I messaged her, and I out of the blue, and I said, "Hi, Sally, we have friends in contact. I'd love you to listen to my stuff. I've gone to the jazz industry." And she's literally like, "Okay, do you want to meet? And I'll help you." And she sort of really helped me. So I think there's wonderful things about Instagram YouTube that you can really find people and connect with people and ask them, "Oh, could you give me some advice?" or "Consider me in the future," or something. So I think that's really exciting and interesting and helpful. And then there's the other side, is it's a lot of work to keep up the whole Instagram. It's not a facade, but you know.
Yeah, but you have to constantly be in the public eye. You have to constantly be doing things.
Yes,
because
definitely.
if you go quiet, then people think, oh, they're not working, or they forget. There's so many people out there doing something that you're fighting for the attention of people. You're fighting for that attention to show up on their feed, so that when they think, oh, it's my wedding, I need to book a singer, or oh, there's a TV show, we need a band, or something like that. You're there in their memory.
Yes, and it's a really good tool for yourself to promote your performances, your songs, your concert, your albums, your singles, whatever you're doing. So I think before, whereas unless you had a record company, that was sort of, it was never going to happen. You needed that sort of tool. Whereas now I think you can do that by yourself, which I think it's nice as a performer to have that ownership.
And ultimately there is somebody there saying, you can have the job, or I'll put you in touch with the producer. And it comes down to the old phrase of who you know, which is, the phrase gets a bit warped, because every single business person, singer, actor, whatever, every single one of them, it's about a who you know situation. Nobody has done it on their own, because you have somebody that's giving you the permission to be on the TV show or to be on the... And part of the skill is growing your network in a way and that isn't obtrusive. You don't want to be too obtrusive with it, because there's nothing worse than somebody that is networking for the sake of networking. And what would you say to anyone upcoming that is
really
trying to build their network without being too much of a bit of an ick?
Oh my gosh, that's such an interesting question, and it's a really good question, and it's essential for this sort of, it's essential for every work, but especially music industry work. Gosh, I think it's really important to go out to people and ask for help and push yourself forward, but you also have to make sure that the product that you're pushing forward is really good, so that people, because you sort of only really have one opportunity to do that. So if you sort of go in and just be like, listen to my recording that I've done, like, I don't know, in my barn or something, they're going to be like, okay, thank you sort of thing. Whereas I think you really have to go out, for sure, promote yourself, and you should. But I think if what you're promoting has to be really good or the best of what you think you can do, or, you know, be interesting, invite them to a show, invite them, oh, I'm doing this, can you come? Or, you know, hold back like 3 or 4 tickets. I always, whenever I'm doing a show, I always try and hold maybe about 5 tickets and actually give them to people that I think, you know, might book me for this, I might book me for that, which I've always found quite useful because then people see a whole performance. I always remember going to big events and galas, and I always remember people would go and speak to my husband because he's also in the industry, and people would ignore me because I was like a nobody. I was like fresh faced in the London scene, and I always sort of remember who treated me well when I was doing nothing and had no performances. And I think it's so important when you're at an event and you're talking to someone that you also include who they're with, because they're going to go home and say that person was awful to me. Because I've been on the other side and where people have literally stood in front of me to talk to him, I'm like, all right, okay.
It's a show of character and awareness as well. You want to work with people that are socially aware, and that was kind of the premise of the question as well, is that the concept of being an ick is very much what you're describing, going straight to the producer and going, please sign me, or whatever it is, and they can see right through that straight away, and the people around them can see right through that straight away. And I always, and I'm sure is the case with yourself and your husband, but the first person I talk to is my girlfriend.
Yeah, of course.
She's my eyes and ears,
yeah,
and she sees things from a different perspective, and she comes to events, and she's been in the same position as you, where people she's close to are gatekeepers to certain things, and people for some reason get very funny about the partners sometimes, and
partners or people that they think are irrelevant.
The irony is those are probably the most relevant people to be considerate
Always.
of. So the concept of networking has to be done in a very particular way, without being too forceful, but at the same time you have to put yourself out there. I think what strikes me about you is you have the ability, which is your product, which is the singing, but you also have the ability to put yourself out there and understand the social awareness of how to network as well. And that seems to be a winning combination between the two, because there are hundreds of singers out there who have a great ability that have no idea how to get in contact with certain people.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have no shame. I will email everyone and anyone on the planet and ask for their help. I also think an important thing is to listen. So I always try to remember what people have said to me and then come out with them, whatever. I meet them, a year later and say, oh, how was that going? Or that kind of thing, but without sounding terribly cliche. And I hate saying this sort of thing, but I always try to be kind. Like, we don't know what people are going through. I tend to find that people will be helpful and kind if you've been helpful to them. And that's something, as you may know, I've recorded a song for my friend, Deborah James, Tell Me It's Not True. And I was able to pull on every contact I have, and everyone did everything for free. And I genuinely believe it's because, first of all, I've worked my way through the industry. So many people that are, at the top of their game with performing, musicians, were also doing the same thing 10 years ago with me. So they know that, but also I always try and help people and musicians if I can, or with introductions or anything. And I tend to find that it does come back to you. So that's kind of one of my, that gives me sort of the ick saying, be kind and be nice. But I do think it does reciprocate. If you've got a good reputation within the industry, most people will help you.
There's an element of karma there, isn't there? A little bit of
be
nice, and it will come back to you. There's a great book by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People, and that is the core concept. Is you being kind is only ever going to bring kindness back to you. That's a really important point, and you never know who you're working with later down the line, who might, such as this instance with Deborah, where you're able to call on people you've worked with 10 years ago, 5 years ago. You never know. Would you like to elaborate for us on the situation with Deborah? Because I know it's quite a raw topic, because it is fairly recent. But I also think it's important to raise awareness as to what she was raising awareness for, and you created that song in her name, and I believe you also sang at her funeral as well. So it's a very important song to you, to her.
Yeah.
Would you like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so I have known Deborah for about Dame Deborah James for 7 years, and we were introduced to each other through our husbands, and then we sort of immediately hit it off when we met each other, and our love sort of music and musicals and wine and having a good time. And we used to always go out to parties and events together, and she used to always make me sing at her big galas, and you're like, we've got to do this. But she was just like a force to reckon with. She was the nicest person on the planet. She made you feel such warmth if you were around her. She was the most amazing, incredible friend. So I've had quite a lot of bowel issues, and she would send me 100 messages of different papers, different scientific studies, reading reports, who I should be going to see, all this kind of stuff. And she would be going through chemo herself, but she would do that. She just was the most wonderful friend. And then we both had sepsis at the same time, and we made a pact that if we both survived it, we'd go to Ascot together. When we went to Ascot, that was sort of the end of her life. She passed away a week later. But we did have a wonderful afternoon together, drinking and like reminiscing about old times. And she was telling me, I mean, it was a very sad topic. She told me what she wanted for her funeral, and she told me she didn't want to die, which was like the worst thing I'd heard from her. But we also had a really lovely afternoon together, just being able, because she basically didn't want to say goodbye to any of her friends. So she sent us all a message, and she's like, guys, this is it. And sort of everyone sort of messaged her, we'd love to see you, please. And she just said, no, I don't want to see anyone. I don't want to say goodbye. And she messaged me afterwards, and she was like, this was the perfect way to say goodbye. We just had a wonderful afternoon, like old friends. And then she asked me to sing at her funeral, Tell Me It's Not True from Blood Brothers. And it was just the most emotional performance I've ever had to do. I remember her coming in obviously she's in the casket, and I was like hysterical. And I sort of looked at her family, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've really got to get myself together. Like, this has to be like a really good performance. Luckily it went well. And then basically I was performing at the Hello Awards, the Hello to Kindness Awards, and I was sat next to her parents, Heather and Alistair, and we'd become quite good friends and the nicest people on the planet. And they said, oh, would you ever record that song? And I was like, oh, yes, like if that's what you want. And then I was like, oh, record it in like a small studio with me and my pianist or something. And Zaf was like, no. If we're going to do this for Deborah, we do it properly. So we started reaching out to people, and we're like, well, where can we go with this? Like, who's going to help? Ben Kennedy came on board, and he's like an amazing pianist and arranger. Then Abbey Road came on board. We actually reached out to Willie Russell, who's obviously like Tony Olivier Award composer, who wrote the piece. And he said, oh, I've actually watched Natalie's clip of her singing this song, and I give you full permission to record it, and I give you my blessing. And he actually gave us the royalties and rights for the piece. So everything goes directly, all the money that's raised from downloads and streams goes directly to the Bowel Babe Fund. And then I sort of called every single person, every musician, and I said, can you do this? Can you do this? And in the end, we had Abbey Road Studio. We had amazing producers, amazing engineers, like BBC recording it. We recorded it with this woman called Sarah Hardy, who made the documentary. So she knew Deborah, and it was just incredible. And then her parents came down to the recording studio, and it was such an emotional day, but it was really beautiful because she would have loved it. So the last sort of 2 weeks of my life, I've been sort of heavily doing the campaign, talking about check your poo, making sure that people hear it. And obviously it's been number 1 iTunes, and it went into the top 10. Well, it was number 10 in the official charts, which is like nuts because we absolutely had no budget. We've spent physically nothing. So the fact that all that money can go, and the fact that someone can do it without a recording company behind them, is like ridiculous.
It's incredible what has been achieved, and
Yeah.
I think you're very right in saying that she would be very, very pleased with, I mean, you as a friend as well, to know that you've gone out and done that, because I don't think there's many people going back to what you said about you've got no shame about emailing people, I don't think there's many people that would have been able to pull off what you've done and truly be able to respect what she had also built. She'd built so much awareness around bowel cancer and the Bowel Babe Foundation and her show in affiliation with BBC. To be able to continue on that in such a way is beautiful, and hopefully it has a lasting effect as well, and hopefully it can go on to even bigger and greater things. So congratulations, because it's well deserved. It deserves to be up there in the charts.
Need some sleep.
Yeah. I imagine it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work.
It was constant, probably about 4 months of constant work. And do you know what was amazing about the music industry is I think because it was a fellow musician asking another musician to help out for someone they had definitely heard about her journey. So many people came on board, and if they couldn't do it, then they got their friends to do it. Oh, I can get this one, there's this person. And I was amazed that I was like, wow, it really does show that like musicians are like incredible people.
Yeah, I think so. Most of the people that I've worked with have been very nice to work with. Very, very nice. And you also got fantastic distribution, the opportunity to be on Sky.
Yeah.
Was that something that Sky were interested to put out there, or was that something that you had to knock on the door?
It was a mix, to be honest. So we were very kindly helped by, I know, a PR company that came on board to help us. And they basically helped us with organising things. But also I pulled on the last 10 years of doing performances where you meet people and then you're like, hang on a second, hello, I need your help now. For example, I was doing a Christmas performance last year and Jeremy Vine was one of the speakers and we exchanged emails and he asked me to do his radio show talking about COVID. I had COVID quite badly. And I then reached out to him and was like, hey, Jeremy, just so you know, I'm releasing this single and I need your help. And then he was like, okay. And then we went on the Jeremy Vine show. So I think it's a mix. You never know, like 10 years later, you might be pulling on a contact that you worked with before. So it was definitely mixed, but we had so much support from The Sun, who obviously Deborah wrote her column for, and the BBC were amazing, and Sky were amazing to include us, and GB Muse and all this kind of thing. So we were really lucky. Well, I say lucky. It was lots of people working together to try and make something great for her.
It's projects like that really give you faith in humanity. The fact that you pulled in all these favours is what gives it an even more human essence to it as well. I think that's what makes it extra special.
I don't think anyone's going to pick up my phone call now. I'd said that to my friend. I was like, I don't think I can pull on any favours ever again, at least for about 10 years.
Well, but they would have seen what the end result is.
Yeah.
And I think when somebody is part of something like that, it makes them feel a certain way. And I don't see why not. I don't see why that hasn't even strengthened the relationship between those two people. To do something in the future. Yeah, let me know in a couple of months or something if the phone's gone quiet. But no, really, congratulations, because it's an amazing achievement, and I think everyone involved will be feeling very grateful, especially Deborah's family as well. I'm sure they're very grateful for it.
And I remember when we started talking about the recording for Deborah, people were like, "Oh, but do you have a record company?" And I was like, "No." It's going to be really hard. Well, yes, it is going to be really, really hard. And there's going to be numerous bumps that will go across the road that we could never even thought about when we first started. For example, even though we were on iTunes #1 for like basically a whole week, you know, when you go to the homepage and they say top hits of today, new releases, new songs today, they would never include us in anything.
Really? Is that because you didn't have a label?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So it was constantly, and then it meant asking more and more people to share it. So it would just, you know, people would be able to find it. So it was just, so I think for me, when people say I can't do something, then I'm like, no, I will do it then. That's my sort of driving force.
I think probably I share that with you a little bit. There's something in you that doesn't like someone else to tell you can't do something.
Yep. There's always like that little something, and I'm always like, oh, I'm going to quit. Or, I mean, not recently, but, you know, for the first 10 years, I was like, oh gosh, this is just awful. And you're like, oh gosh, there's something that makes you want to carry on. And I think those are the people. I think there's a Will Ferrell thing going around TikTok. I think it's Will Ferrell. And he says the only thing that joins us all together of these actresses and actors and singers is that the people at the top never gave up. That's it.
Yeah. I strongly, strongly believe that with all ounce of my body, particularly for business. But where I have a real thought battle crisis is it's different for singing and acting and music and entertainment, because there are certain roles that you only get at certain ages.
Yeah.
And there is a preference for like, for example, with my acting, if I don't get a role as a teenage heartthrob in the next 2 to 3 years, that's it, that boat sailed. So if your goal is to be a teenage heartthrob, you can't sit there and say, just keep going, because you're on a timeline, you're on a time frame.
Yeah, but I thought, do you know what? I thought it's really interesting. When I was in my 20s, yes, of course, with acting, if you want to play like a very like particular role, then of course. But I do think the industry is changing. And I thought from 20 to 30, I was like, that's my limit. You know, you go into record companies and they're like, once you're past 30, you're like sent to the pasture field. Like, that's it. And I genuinely believe that. And especially being a woman, you're like completely drilled in, being like, you need to be young to be at the front of the stage. And then I got to my 30s and I was like, hang on a second, I'm getting the best gigs I've ever had in my life. I'm singing the songs I love. I'm doing what I want to be doing. I'm doing all these amazing that I could have never even believed that would have happened. And I think people like, you know, Adele says this. She said, I wrote songs for people my age that wanted to listen to music. You know, I'm not writing for the teeny boppers. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be a pop singer. Can't dance for one thing, but I'm not going to be a pop singer. You know, I can do my own thing and I'm carving out my own path. And I think, you know, we are taught that life does sort of end when you become slightly older or you have children. And I've sort of found the opposite.
That's great to hear. And actually, you know, I haven't been through certain stages of my life yet, but that's the conclusion that I came to when I was having these thought battles.
Yeah.
And also, we have to be grateful for the fact that in classical and jazz world, there's actually a real respect for the longer someone's been in the game, which is, I think, a good thing, because it takes a lot to stay relevant in a certain industry.
It's a good thing. I mean, I thought when I had Rose, that would be the end of my career. I genuinely believed that. And I think you're sort of told, you know, you have kids and that's the end. But actually it hasn't been the case at all. I've been able to use so many elements of like motherhood and bring elements to my singing. It just means that I just don't take on all the other gigs I don't want to be doing.
This scene of jazz and classical and theatre, you can be doing that till forever. I mean, people like Shirley Bassey and you know, it's timeless. And people really appreciate and enjoy, and the older you get, the more experience you bring, the more wisdom you bring to your performance. The voice sounds slightly different. You don't sound like a teenager anymore. People like that.
Yeah, I
really
saw Gladys Knight perform at Ronnie Scott's, and obviously she's in her 70s. That was the best show I've ever seen. She was sensational. She was just amazing. Her voice was incredible. She looked incredible. I mean, just the performance was incredible. And I just thought, wow. So I just kind of feel people like to pigeonhole you into different things and you have to sit that spot. But I've sort of realised that if you sort of just carry on your merry path, that...
Create your own path.
Create your own path.
That's exactly what you're doing. And that is also the most fulfillable.
Yeah.
I feel that is the way to do it. When you first enter a situation, you are the novice, the beginner, and you're trying to learn and understand how things go. As people drop out, by the average, so let's say that the oldest one drops out, or the one that's done with it drops out, then a new one comes up, and eventually you find yourself moving up just by purely being there. Not by doing anything else. You just have to be in the game, and eventually other people drop out, new people come in, and those new people are novices trying to understand how the game works. And eventually people come to you for advice as, how do I get this? And before you know it, you're the top dog in the arena, because other people have dropped out and you've just stayed in there. So back to your Will Ferrell meme or quote or whatever it is, staying in the game. And I think it was Seth Rogen I saw say the same thing.
It might be Seth Rogen that said it.
He said, out of everybody that I've seen in this acting world, the people that have made it have just stuck with it and stuck with
Yeah.
it. And I think there's a lot to be said. And I am also a fan of that, because that differentiates between
Yeah.
the people that actually want to do this for their
Yeah.
life and those who don't. And
Yeah.
the top reward should be given to those who have been willing to do
Work,
so
yeah.
and work.
Yeah.
I think where we get warped is when the 16, 17-year-old in the media gets absolutely blown out of proportion, like
Yeah.
the Justin Bieber, and you sit there and you think, how's that happened?
Yep.
What have they done that's different to... And I think that warps the public perception, and I think, unfortunately, it warps performers' perception as well of how things work.
Yep. I think people see the glossy facade and think it's easy, but haven't seen it's easier to forget the 10, 15 years of hard work, climbing up this imaginary ladder. Yeah, it's hard.
Should we take a little
Yeah.
toilet break and then...
I think if someone said, what's your dream scenario? Like, what would you like to do now? My dream, and if money wasn't an object and like nothing, it didn't need to be successful and I just needed to do it, I would love to do like a huge swing piece band album. And I kind of feel like we have Michael Bublé and he's amazing, but we don't have any females that have done that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to do that. That would be my ultimate goal.
That's also something I would absolutely love to do. Yeah, I really share that with you.
Yeah.
Because you're right, there's Michael Bublé, but he's been around for a while.
It's been a while for a while.
There's no one really taking the next step.
The reins.
Yeah.
It should be you.
Thank you very much. I didn't want to say it, but now that you
It was
say
you,
it.
I put it out.
No, I've thought about that. And when I first started out, I thought, I can sound like Michael Bublé a lot if I try.
Yeah.
And then you have to be so careful because
Yeah.
you don't want to be a tribute act. That's the
No.
last thing you want to do. And I remember I would do shows and start with Feeling Good, and people would be like, oh my God, you sound so much like Bublé. And eventually I got to the point where I thought, actually, that's not a good thing. You want to be an individual stamp on yourself. And that's something that's taken me time. And now I feel like I am an authentic version of myself. And when I perform live, it has my voice on it.
Yeah. I think it's difficult when you do jazz or classical that you don't want to become a sort of joke or a cliche or someone. You need to be your own person doing your own thing. And Elton John says it always takes 10 years for an artist to find out who they are. And I think that's a really, really important way to live as an artist. Experiment, try different things, try different songs, different styles.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good to take inspiration from these artists.
Oh, 100%.
Because there's a reason they are where they're at. And I absolutely love Bublé stuff. I'm a massive fan of...
But he also took lots of stuff from Frank Sinatra and, all of the, old school...
And made it his own.
Exactly.
And I actually think one of the reasons why we haven't had the next Bublé, because there's plenty of people that have tried, and I've looked into it because that's been an ambition of me to step into his shoes. There's plenty of people that have tried, and every single one of them has tried too much to be like Bublé.
Yeah.
And they're just not original enough. But then on the other side of things, you've got someone like Jamie Cullum, who is probably, and I love Jamie Cullum stuff, but maybe even too original to the point where he's not filling the boots of Bublé because it's too different.
But he's doing his own thing.
Exactly. Yeah, he's doing his own thing. He's not filling that role of Bublé.
Yeah. It's a fine line to balance, basically.
And it's also not quite as simple as, I'll just fill the boots of this person, even though you might think you're good enough. What you're talking about, that big band album, is something that I've wanted to do for ages. And I put together a big band, and I did a big band recording.
Yes.
In studio with Calamau, who arranged Bublé's Berkeley Square song.
Amazing.
It was an amazing, amazing experience. And I did it independently without a record label. And that process cost me. I got a single out of it. I got an EP out of it. The idea was to make demo tracks to send to record labels to say, look, I'm doing something that's different to Bublé, but can fill his boots. There's a big band song here. There's a jazz band song here.
What did they say?
I haven't been able to get in touch with them. They're very hard to get in touch with. And
so I've had numerous meetings with record companies.
Yeah.
While I haven't had one recently, But at the very beginning of my career, I had management and I'd gone into various different record companies, and they've always said the same thing, that there's a lot of luck. And secondly, it's to do with you. This is what I've never quite understood. You need to be able to sell the singles and tracks and albums on your own before you go to them.
Yeah.
And my question to them was always the same. If I could sell them on my own, why would I need you guys?
That's so funny. What it is that record labels no longer want to do the legwork.
No.
They want you to do it. And the reason is because these days you can go boom on TikTok or Instagram and you can already do all that work for them.
Yeah.
So they'll just take the easy option of finding someone that's done all the work.
Yeah.
And the quote that I've heard from a couple of people in the music business is they'll take you on whether you could make it with or without them. That person's going to make it.
Yeah.
We'll take them on because they're going to make it anyway.
Yeah. But then would you just release it on your own accord?
And that's the dilemma that the artist then has of why do I need you?
Yeah.
And then they respond by saying, well, we've got the contacts, we've got the distribution, we can make it go even bigger.
Yeah.
And it used to be the case where they'd find an artist, develop them, release their stuff, and that would be
and
the way
it was the same in the movie industry. You know, Judy Garland, you know, all of these old school, you know, actresses would be signed when they were babies, basically, and then they would work, and then they are who they think you are. And, you know, they have the whole performance element. They are able to, you know, walk on stage, they're dressed right, they'll be able to greet people, they'd be able to talk to media correctly. And that was all taken in by the industry would do that for them, would teach them how to do it, would teach them how to act, all this kind of thing. And that was taken. So you know, it is harder because you don't have that, but you can do it by yourself.
What seems to be the case is there's been a redistribution of making it, where you've got more artists that are able to make a good living from being a musician, and less of those big breaks. I got a record label, I signed to this. There's plenty more people in the industry now who that's their thing full time, that's what they do. Yeah. And that's possible because they don't need the record label. So it's kind of a win-lose situation. But personally for me, I'm not in it to make a good living as an artist. I'm in it to blow things out the park and take it to another level. So that's where I'd
like to make a living. It'd be great. I think it's hard.
It's different.
It's different. And I think also records don't sell like they used to.
No.
So a lot of artists nowadays, you know, they make money off touring, merchandising, performances, and, you know, Instagram, your TikTok, your YouTube, your promotions of different brands and products. They make the money off that. Whereas I think you have to have, we worked this out, for 1 million streams on Spotify makes you £1,000.
Yeah. The streams don't make you money anymore.
They don't make. And I think that's something I find really scary as an artist.
You're no longer getting paid for your final product.
No.
Which
it's all of the other things.
It's all the other things. I've managed to find this niche, and I'm genuinely thinking about, because I'm looking to do other stuff now with the podcast and like more TV and film, I'm genuinely thinking of just releasing all of the like little secrets that I've learned throughout the last few years. And I found a way to do really well off live shows, and I found a formula that seems to work, where I've got regularity, where I'm performing 4 times a week, but I'm also getting bigger shows where the clients are paying more, and I've also got the residency type gigs. And I found this balance. Unless you're getting millions and millions of streams on Spotify, you're not going to be able to make a decent living from streams at that point. I think it's really hard to have that expectation to do that. Whereas you used to be able to sell CDs at a gig, or you used to be able to go to the record store or HMV and be like, put my CD in here, and CDs would sell for 10 quid. And now one stream is like 0.001 pennies.
I think as a musician, in my personal opinion, you need both. You need both.
Yeah.
And you need to just see it as a marketing tool that enables people to hear you sing, basically.
You're absolutely right.
Young musicians need to be careful because I think a lot of the time, especially when I first started off, people promised you the world. And I spent money on recordings and they never went out. They never went anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can be sort of really wrapped up in this kind of, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And I think it's important to have something, but you sort of get trapped into thinking, oh, I need this.
It's a very difficult decision to make, because I remember when it came to recording that stuff, calculating the predicted costs, which, by the way, ended up being twice as much than they actually were. I remember thinking, this is an investment that I'm not going to get back financially in the short to mid run. I didn't do it for the financial return, but I did it to build my brand.
And I think as a musician, you need to have a recording of some.
Here's a question that is specific to females that get married.
Yeah.
Because I've always wondered, if you've built your brand as your maiden name, and then you get married, what's the decision like to take on, if you're doing things traditionally, to take on your partner's name, and does that then affect your brand? Do you start from scratch? How does it work?
I found this personally very difficult. I still find it quite a difficult subject or decision that I had to make. I was obviously known as Natalie Coyle before, and obviously I got married to my husband, and my husband has a very well-known name. I have a very well-known father-in-law. And unfortunately for me, I didn't really make that decision on my own terms. The media sort of made it for me, that they basically started addressing me as Natalie Rushdie before I'd even changed my passport. So I kind of just went with it, because changing the media is harder than you think. So it was changed Natalie Rushdie, and it was always a decision that I wanted the same name as my husband when we had children, but I was always like, oh, I'm going to keep it while I'm performing. But that just wasn't the case for me. So wasn't my decision, but
did it have any implications on your career in bookings?
Not that I noticed. No, not that I noticed.
And in terms of keeping your brand and your name, people kind of just assumed, okay, that's how it is, and they just followed that.
They just followed that, and I thought it was important that I had always, like, on my website, if just little sort of admin things, if someone typed in Natalie Coyle, it would immediately come up with my new website. So just little things like that it was, And to be honest, like, Zaf and I have been together for so many years that it was always, it just happened naturally through media, and then we just carried it on like that. But I did have numerous conversations.
Aside from the performance aspect, in terms of your personal life and being connected to a certain surname, did that change anything for you then? Because that's always something that's very interesting. If you've grown up your whole life as part of one family, and essentially during marriage you're joining another family, and you haven't been part of their family history, but all of a sudden you have to get on board very quickly. I think,
I've been with my husband for like 13 years, so I know his family very well, and I love and adore them. I think the thing is that I really struggled with is that I was always referred to, like, even, and I talked about this, it became a national story. I did a performance at the Wembley Stadium, and the presenter said, oh, that's I think I might have been Coyle at that point, that's daughter-in-law, after my performance. And I actually tweeted about it and said, how is that important? Why is that important when I've done a performance of the national anthem, I've done that on my own accord, I've been booked by myself, I've been like, it's got nothing to do with who I'm married to, but you've decided to sort of diminish my achievements just to who I'm married to. And I found that very difficult, but I'm quite, I'm happy to voice my maybe displeasure with what they've said, because I don't think it's right. And I know people have said in the past, she's got to where she is because of who she's with. And I know we discussed this earlier, that Zaf and I were dating for a year, and I said, oh, would you take me on as one of, your clients and help me? And he said, no. He said, you're not good enough. You need to go away and you train. So that was something that I did. I went away and I trained in musical theatre. I'd already had my degree. I got a diploma in performing. I did all my stuff. And I think that's something that I find quite difficult, is that I can do so many things. I can perform at the Royal Albert Hall, Wembley Stadium. I can tour the UK with a classical boy band. I can do anything, but sometimes people will still relate me back to my family. So it's a real struggle for me, because I want people to know me as a singer, not just who I'm married to.
I'm really glad that you're here and being able to say that, because having spoken to you for the last couple of hours, I think you've got this amazing personality, this bubbly personality, very easy to chat to converse to. And I don't think that that's out there enough. I don't think that people realise enough what you're about. And I'm really pleased that you're getting the opportunities to do that, and by going on these things like Sky and having these other interviews outside of singing, going back to what we're saying, doing the other bits and bobs, because it builds that persona around you. What you've done is yours in your own right, and at the end of the day, you're the one putting on the show. You're the one singing. It's your name that should be on the headlights. And back to what we were saying about the family and the family name. When I first started doing things, and I've done television shows in the public eye, and this podcast goes out publicly, I try and keep this as unrestricted as I can, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about anything. There have been times where I've come off the podcast and I always watch them with my girlfriend, we listen back, and there's been a couple of times she's like, why did you say that? Why did you say that on the podcast? And I thought, I want people to know that this is what I am. This is what I'm about. I don't want to have to think about my family's. I'm not doing anything ridiculous. I don't have ridiculous points of view, but I want to be thinking about what is best for this guest to get across their story in the way that they want to, and talk about whatever it is that they want to. Do you find when you're performing, or when you're out and about, or when you're doing public events in the public eye, you have to think about, how is this perception going to come across on the family side of things, on the family name?
It's a good question. I have never thought about it that way. I definitely don't think that when I'm performing. When I'm performing, I feel like I am myself, and I give who I am. I love doing live shows because I'm able to talk and perform. When I'm just doing a performance, like a one-off, then obviously I don't think about, I just think I've got to do a great performance. There is an element of that, just because people are interested in certain aspects of my life. I do think about it, but I try not to let it I don't let it dictate who I am. I think for me also personally, probably why I don't talk so much on sort of social media is that I'm severely dyslexic.
Really?
So it's really strange. I find at home I'm not very good at sort of talking. And then sort of when sort of like a microphone comes on, something just happens.
You're very articulate.
Yeah, that I can sort of compute. And I think it's like the performance of the singing aspect that I'm used to sort of doing that. But, and that's maybe something that's sort of held me back, that I've sort of I'm like really badly dyslexic. So I try and sometimes would get frustrated with myself talking, but actually I think I'm probably fine talking.
I think you're great. I think you should do more of it. I'm hoping this has been an opportunity for you to think, I want to do more of this kind of thing. And maybe it could be something you branch into. You were talking about maybe doing your own podcast.
I would love, I love this idea of this podcast. This podcast is amazing because it's a really interesting concept. And I think it's a really important tool for new performers.
Yeah. We've been able to get under the iceberg and actually talk about what it entails to be a performer. Yeah. You've been an outstanding guest, and I think you really embody what it is to be this journey of a singer and show people exactly what your career has been and led to. And I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see where things go from here.
Who knows?
I think
it's just never...
You never know what's around the corner.
You never know. You literally never know. I've got been asked to do a very exciting gig in September. And I'm really excited about that. But other than that, I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea. Every day is different.
I've very much enjoyed getting to know you, and I hope we see each other at some point in
Maybe
the future.
we'll do a
very
gig
soon.
together.
I'd love to. I'm always up for.
Let's sort that out.
Yeah, I'd love to. That'd be very nice.
When's your next gig?
We're not off yet.
Oh, gosh,
no,
sorry.
I'm happy to. I can conclude it if you like. We can.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. You've been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
And where can people find you on social media?
Social media. Instagram, it's just Natalie Rushdie, and YouTube is Natalie Rushdie. And of course, please, if anyone's listening, please download Tell Me It's Not True from Blood Brothers. All the fund goes directly to the Bowel Babe Fund. As we mentioned, Spotify, you basically have to get 1 million plays. So we do prefer iTunes. But it's available on Apple, Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, everything. So any sharing, playing is much appreciated.
Wonderful. Natalie, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on.
I feel we always need to clap at the end.